Hello, everybody. I'm so excited that you guys are here tonight. It's 6 o'clock on the dot here on the East Coast. So I know we'll probably have a couple more people join, but I want to first off start off and say thank you. Hopefully, you're here for the biology of the neurodivergent brain. I'm very excited to be talking with you tonight. And really, this master class is for anybody who's struggling with ADHD, anxiety, emotional overwhelm, burnout, PMDD, or just feeling like your brain suddenly stopped working the way it used to. You're in the right place. Okay. That's what this masterclass is about. We're going to talk about the biology of the neurodivergent brain, especially in women and especially in women in midlife. All right. Because this is not just about mindset, it's not laziness, it's not about failing life. Guess what? It's dopamine, it's estrogen, it's cortisol, it's inflammation, it's nervous system load, and a brain that has been working overtime for years. Okay. So let's talk about tonight what's actually going on. So hopefully that's what you're here to do and to join us. Um, okay, hold on. You can't see the screen sharing. Okay, hold on. Let me stop and reshare it. Thank you for saying that. Sometimes I also can't see the chat. So if something goes glitchy or wrong, like it always does, just unmute and tell me to. All right, I'm going to reshare. Hold on. Okay, can you see that?
I can.
Okay, awesome. Thank you. All right, let's make sure. Okay, that looks good. Okay, if you can see, let me know. Okay. Okay, so here we go. Who the heck am I? That's the first thing, right? Who am I to talk to you about all of this? Well, my name is Dr. Sarah. I'm a board certified physician, and my mission in life is to help neurodivergent women finally feel understood and help you to understand the biology behind our brains, our hormones, and our nervous systems so we can stop blaming ourselves for our symptoms and the things that we've been doing for a long time. And we can actually start taking charge of our lives for the real people who we are and who we've always been. Okay. We're going to use words, fancy words like masking, right? Allostatic load, things like that. By no means, if you don't have a diagnosis and you identify this, I'm not diagnosing anybody here tonight. Okay. Just a disclaimer, this is for educational purposes. But we need to talk about the real stuff. Okay. And the most important piece is education. The more we learn about ourselves, I want to create generational change. So if we learn this about ourselves now, we can make a better way path for our daughters, our granddaughters, our nieces, the girls that matter into our lives. And that's what we're here to do. Up on the screen, feel free to follow me. That's my Instagram. I'd love to have you. We do some fun stuff there. But that's who I am. And I'm also neurodivergent. Okay. So I speak not only from the medical side, but also the lived experience. All right. So I'm not going to talk about, oh, introduce yourself in the chat. We're not going to wait 20 minutes to kind of get to the content. If you clicked on this webinar, it's probably because you already know why you're here. Um, Maybe you've been diagnosed with ADHD or autism or both, and you're still angry that it took this long. Maybe you suspect you're neurodivergent. Maybe you don't have a diagnosis, and every quiz you take says you do or probably, but then you go to seek, help, and the doctor says no one takes you seriously. Okay. Maybe you're in your 40s, your brain's falling apart, and you don't know if it's perimenopause, burnout, ADHD, or maybe the trifecta. Maybe it's a little bit of all three. So, wherever you're sitting here tonight, I want you to hear this up front. And this is a piece that's so important. Nothing about what you are going to learn in the next 45 minutes is something that's wrong with you. Okay. It's all about how your brain and your biology actually work together. And most of us were never taught this. I was actually never taught this, even in medical school. Okay. I've had to do years and years and years of my own research in integrative medicine because of my own path with the neurodivergence. Okay. So nothing is wrong with anybody, right? We just need to see what we're doing. Okay, what we're going to learn tonight, what are we going to talk about? Our little roadmap. Tonight, we're going to look at what neurodivergence actually means biologically, not as the disorder, right? No, but as a different operating system. All right. We're going to look at why ADHD and autism present differently in women than in girls than they do in men and boys. And why medicine has really missed the boat for decades. Because I really believe that if we don't call out the problem, we can't fix the problem. Okay. And we need to fix this problem. We're going to talk about masking, right? What it is, why we women do it automatically, and what it quietly costs over our lifetime. And then we're going to look at the hormonal layer. All right. Nobody talks about this a lot. Why your symptoms shift across your cycle, why that's biology, not weakness. And then we're going to, for those of you that are or think you're in perimenopause, why perimenopause can feel like your brain suddenly falls apart and the neurological reasons behind it, because they're so true. And then why so many women don't get diagnosed into 40s. And I see 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s sometimes in my office that we're getting these late diagnoses. Okay. And why really that timing is not a coincidence. And then the real connection between ADHD, autism, PMDD, and now the new term PMOS, which used to be PCOS. So we're going to look at those four things and why conventional medicine treats them completely separate, but really they're interlinked together. Okay. So everybody take a deep breath because we're going to go through a lot and that's okay. You're going to get a replay. So I like to say this. If at any time it becomes too much, you're like, I just don't want to do this anymore. You can turn your screen off. You can shut the sound off. You can completely leave the master class and you will get it in a replay so you can take those bits and pieces that you need. This is a safe environment and I want you to take it the way you need to take it. Okay. It's very important to me. So let's start with looking at this as a different operating system. Let's start with a word that's probably been thrown around a lot, which is neurodivergent. Okay. I want to actually define it because for a long time, I didn't actually know what the word meant. Yes, I knew neurodivergence was referring to ADHD and autism, but I didn't actually know where the word came from. And I think that that's really important. Neurodivergence describes a brain that's wired and developed differently from what's considered typical. ADHD, autism, dyslexia, they're all neurodevelopmental. That word means that they're present from very early in development. They're not something that happens to you later in life, that they're not being caused by bad parenting, too much screen time, lack of discipline, all of those types of things. Okay. The most useful way that I like to think about this and describe it is think of two different laptops. One runs on Windows and one runs on as a Mac. Okay. Neither one of them is broken. Neither one of them is right or wrong. They're just different. Okay. Neither one is like the real computer and the other one's malfunctioning copy. They're just running on different operating systems, a different code, different defaults, different things that come easily to one and things that take more effort for another. This is how I like to think of it. A neurotypical brain and a neurodivergent brain are a bit like that. Same hardware, same neurons, same basic biology, but different operating systems underneath. An ADHD brain doesn't have a weaker version of focus. It has a dopamine driven, interest based attention system that struggles with boring but important information that can also hyper focus for 6 hours on something genuinely engaging. And I think every one of you in the room has probably done that. When I created the other day a Go High Level page for 3 hours, I sat there. I still haven't done anything with it, but I created it. It was exciting to me because I learned it and now I created that. Okay. An autistic brain isn't missing social skills. It's actually often running a system that prioritizes patterns, precision, and honesty over social performance. We just are running on different operating systems. Okay. This is the reframe that I want to really look at from disorder to difference, okay? It's not just a feel-good talking point. It's not like, oh, it's not a disorder, it's a difference. No, it actually came out of some real teaching in the late 1990s. An Australian sociologist, Judy Singer, who herself was autistic, she actually coined the term neurodivergent. Her argument was very simple. Human brains naturally vary the same way human bodies naturally vary. And that variation is part of biology, not a defect in it. Okay. I love that, right? That variation is part of biology, not a defect in it. And why does this matter tonight? Because once we understand that ADHD and autism or ADHD are biologic, wired in, present from early development, a question naturally flows. If it's biological, why do so many of us go 15, 20, 30, 60, 70, right? Years without anyone noticing? That's what we're going to talk about, right? That is part of the problem that we have to identify. And one of the first things to call out, right, is why does this look different in women? Okay, why does this look different in women? Here's the uncomfortable truth about everything we know about ADHD, autism was built by watching boys. Okay, for decades, the research samples, the checklists, the case studies, they were overwhelmingly male. This isn't just true for neurodivergence, right? This is true for all of medicine. And then it was extrapolated that women and girls were just little versions of boys and men, which we obviously know is not true. So the criteria became a description about how ADHD and autism happen to present in boys, and then got treated like a universal description of the conditions themselves. Here's the first problem, okay? We're getting compared to boys. And guess what? ADHD and autism look very different in girls and boys. Boys with ADHD tend to be hyperactive, impulsive, in ways that are really hard to miss. And that's why that a lot of them get diagnosed in school, right? Because they're getting in and out of their seat. They're blurting out answers. They're getting sent to the principal's office. They get noticed, right? That, and a lot of times, oh, I think he has ADHD, and that gets referred. Now, girls with ADHD, which is what we'll talk about first, girls with ADHD, are far more likely to show the inattentive presentation. We daydream, we lose things, we have great ideas, but we can't organize. We look great on the outside, but quietly we're underperforming. And girls are also more likely to have co-occupying or coexisting anxiety. So instead of getting evaluated for ADHD, a lot of us get told that we're anxious or we're sensitive or we're too much or we're not living up to our potential. So if anybody's in the room, right, raise your hand because that's most of us. Most of us in this room were told we're too much. I get told all the time that. You're too sensitive. You're just, you just always have to be something, right? No, I don't. It is something. And then we look at autism, okay? Same story. Same story here. Boys are more likely to show the externalized signs textbooks describe. Girls and women are more likely to internalize. The distress shows up as anxiety, depression, eating related struggles long before anybody ever considers autism. And research reviews this pattern has consistently found that this is a scary statistic, ladies, that have found that girls diagnosed with are always, for the most part, significantly amount diagnosed later than boys, and they are more likely to collect an alternative diagnosis first. And a lot of times, that alternative diagnosis is a mood disorder, bipolar. Sometimes it's also a personality disorder. And that there's instances where those things are true, but a lot of times it's actually undiagnosed autism. And guess what? They are not treated the same. Okay. Bipolar is not treated the same as autism. And so a lot of these girls, us women, we suffer because we are getting diagnosed with a disorder that we don't have. We are getting treated for a disorder we don't have, and then the world wonders why we're not better. Okay? The world wonders why we're not better because it's not the right diagnosis. Okay? This isn't a story about ADHD and autism being rarer in women. Okay? The conditions are likely just as common in men and women. What was rare was a diagnostic system that knew how to recognize us. Put plainly and bluntly, it's not that, it's basically we were too subtle to notice. Okay. And nobody had that tool. Nobody built the instrument to notice us because they had this different version of what us, autism and ADHD and the combination, should look like based on a completely different sex. So nothing was ever built to identify us. First problem. All right. Now, this is a big word. Masking is a big word, okay? And we do it so well, ladies, okay? We do it so well. So if girls and women were showing different symptoms, inattention instead of hyperactivity, internalized instead of externalized, there's this piece, right, making this even harder to spot. Masking. Okay. And masking, giving a little background, is sometimes actually called camouflaging. And it's the process of consciously or unconsciously hiding your natural traits to blend in. For an autistic person, this might mean forcing eye contact that feels uncomfortable. Has anybody ever done that? Scripting conversations in advance, copying other people's facial expressions and body language, right? Or suppressing the urge to stim. For someone with ADHD, some of us, masking might look like white knuckling through a meeting that we care nothing about and have nothing to focus on. Or staying up until 2 a.m., rebuilding a system that fell apart because we can't let anybody see that we're failing at something, that we fail at organization, that we didn't get that job done 6 hours while we were at work. But now that we're home, now we stay up till 2 a.m. trying to get that job done. Here's why women mask more and mask earlier. Girls, we are socialized from a very young age to be agreeable, right? For the most part, read the room, make things, this makes things uncomfortable for other people. That pressure to perform socially well lands on girls earlier and harder than it lands on boys. Okay. And it's just about cognitive and brain development. So by the time a lot of us reach adulthood, masking isn't a strategy we've consciously chose. It is literally survival. It is literally how we survive. Okay. It becomes automatic. We don't even realize we do that. Have you ever stopped to think, like when you walk in a room, do you analyze the entire room? I do. I'm like, oh, Paul over there, he looks mad. Oh, they're in a heated conversation. I wonder what's going on. That's expensive. Okay. That's expensive. Um, yeah, we do this automatically. And masking is genuinely effective at one thing. I want you to hear this. Masking is effective at one thing, making other people feel comfortable. Okay, that's what masking is good for, making other people feel comfortable. And it's also really, really expensive to us. Research on camouflaging in autistic adults has found it takes real, sustainable cognitive and emotional effort. And the degree to which someone masks, and see if you feel this is true for you, tracks more closely with anxiety, depression, exhaustion, and burnout than any other severity of any other trait out there. So the more we mask, the more likely we are to develop anxiety, depression, exhaustion, and pure and utter burnout. This is huge. It is metabolically and it is neuronally taxing to mask. Okay. So think about what that means in practice. So some of us have been masking since elementary school, right? That's not a few stressful months. That's 2, 3, 4 decades of running a second exhausting program in the background of our brain all at the same time, right? Just so the people around us don't notice that anything is off. And here's the cruelest irony. And I really think this is the cruelest irony. The better we are at masking, the less anyone notices that something is the problem, including ourselves. Okay. Nobody suspects we're neurodivergent because we are so efficient at masking and making the outside look so good. So our coping mechanisms and how great we are at that become one of the other confounding factors of why we can be having a delayed diagnosis because we're so good at what we do. Now, let's add in hormones because this is huge. And no, people are talking about hormones, especially in women's health, but hormones in the neurodivergent brain are something very different. Okay. We do not do things the same as neurotypical brains. And a lot of times we suffer from hormonal diagnoses since the day we get our period. Okay. And then what happens? We get gaslit. No one really listens to us. So here's something that almost never makes it into the standard ADHD and autism conversation. Hormones are basically a side note, right? They're directly wired into the same brain chemistry that ADHD and autism involved. They have to do with our dopamine, right? We're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about estrogen and dopamine and how they're related. So here is estrogen and dopamine and their link. So we all know dopamine, right? Everybody knows dopamine. Dopamine is our amazing neurotransmitter. It works on that prefrontal cortex, or I like to call the CEO of our brain, which is our center of what? Focus and motivation and reward, right? And it's the exact chemical system that ADHD medications are designed to support. Guess what? Estrogen has receptors there. Okay. Estrogen works in the prefrontal cortex. Hey, guess what? So actually does testosterone. Okay. Which is why it can be very powerful for the neurodivergent brain. Estrogen has that direct link and it's supportive of dopamine. So when estrogen is higher, dopamine tends to feel stronger. We call this, when we're looking at periods, we call that a follicular lift, right? Once you get your period and your estrogen starts to go up, that's why you can have 1 or 2 weeks a month where you're, yeah, I'm so creative, the energy's flowing. I don't even think I need ADHD meds anymore, right? That's estrogen. And that's why also, when we talk about PMDD later, that's why also things can crash because in that luteal phase, you're in your lowest of estrogen. It's connected to dopamine. Okay. It's connected to dopamine. And guess what? When estrogen drops, guess where dopamine goes? Right with it. Okay. Estrogen drops, dopamine goes too. And so this relationship plays out every single month if you have a menstrual cycle. In the first half of your cycle, estrogen climbs towards ovulation, follicular lift, right? And a lot of women, especially those with ADHD, we feel what? Good, sharper, more motivated. I'm on point. I'm making, I can, all my thoughts are coming and everything is going. Then after ovulation, as estrogen starts to drop and progesterone rises, focus can get harder, irritability climbs, right? That's when your work partner's like chomping and you're like, oh my God, why can I hear them chew? Right. And if you take medication, stimulant medication, you may notice it doesn't even work as well during that window. If you've ever had a provider tell you your ADHD symptoms can't fluctuate that much month to month, I hear this a lot. It's a complete and utter lie. Okay. I want you to know that you're not imagining it. It's because this is so true. Estrogen, it's really simple, actually, ladies. Estrogen and dopamine. Okay. When estrogen fluctuates, it does affect dopamine. And as we already know, especially from an ADHD perspective, we already have some issues in the dopamine department, right? So we don't need it to go down any further. This is why we can really suffer. Okay. And it's also, all of this is obviously still being researched now that we're giving research to neurodivergence and women and midlife, right? We're going to get there in 20 years or so. But now we have to talk about it, right? And we have to say what's actually really going on. Okay. So let's talk about some tough stuff. So PMDD, or premenstrual dysphoric disorder. And if anybody in the room has it, you know it. Okay. It is a severe form of premenstrual syndrome, or PMS, significant mood, anxiety, and cognitive disruptions in that 1 to 2 weeks. Remember, some women will have the second half of the cycle right after ovulation. They'll just start going into luteal and crash. And then some women, it's 7 days, 5 days before their period when the estrogen gets really low and they start to crash. Multiple studies have found women with ADHD and autism report PMDD at a more meaningful higher rate than the general population. And what the newest numbers are is about 4 to 6% of women will suffer from PMDD. 40% of those are neurodivergent. 40. If this doesn't tell you and be a good show that estrogen and testosterone, right, are related to fluctuations, our hormone levels and dopamine, I don't know what does. 40% have PMDD. Okay. And we're not even talking about postpartum and all of those things tonight. That's for a different talk. But guess what? We are at higher risk of having postpartum depression and psychosis as well. Right. And that's why this matters. Right. Because if a week before a period feels unmanageable, not just like I'm moody, I have some cramping, but literally I have patients that they can't get out of bed for 7 days. Right. They want to commit their suicide. Right. We don't want to say that, but it's true. And we have to call it. They want to kill themselves 7 days out of the month. Right. We got to talk about this. And guess what? There is treatments that are not birth control and not SSRIs. Those do work in some circumstances, but you have to work with an astute clinician. But there is ways that we can help PMDD, right? We need to make sure your vitamins and your nutrients are correct. What is the biggest micronutrient deficiency in depression and anxiety? B6. Okay. Now, that doesn't mean that if you take B6, it cures all of depression and anxiety, right? But we need these precursors to these neurotransmitters. Same thing with mitochondria, right? Your mitochondria are the powerhouse of your cell. They're making all of your energy. And we need those. Guess what? When we take medications, when we are constantly masking and having that chronic sympathetic overdrive, guess what happens? That affects our mitochondria. So it's a big, big deal. Okay. Then, especially if we're women that experience PMDD, guess what happens? We insert perimenopause. Okay. And this is when really the floor comes out underneath a lot of women. And this is actually why a lot of women don't get diagnosed until later. And I want to call something and say something here too, that I think is very important. And that is, um, perimenopause, because the estrogen decreases dopamine, it can make actually neurotypical women feel a little bit like they have ADHD. Okay. So if you've never been diagnosed and you don't identify with, like, I don't think I was masking all my life, I don't see myself in all of these things, you may not actually have ADHD. It might actually just be perimenopause decreasing the dopamine enough to make you a little bit more inattentive and feel like that. Okay. For those of us that actually have neurodivergence, guess what? The whole floor comes out. All that masking, all those scaffoldings we so nicely built, guess what happens to them? Boop, they all come crumbling down. Okay. And perimenopause, just for some definition's sake, is that transitional window between before your periods completely stop. Right. And guess what? The average age in the United States of menopause is 51 and a half. Perimenopause can start 7 to 14 years before that. So some women are experiencing this in their 30s. Okay. In their 30s. So this is a time of major transition. Okay. And so here's the cushion. It's gone, right? The cushion is gone. So women, we've spent 20, 30 years successfully, exhaustingly, holding our ADHD and autism together through masking and structure and like sheer force sometimes. So perimenopause can feel like that floor gives out. Brain fog, that feels like nothing normal, right? Women in perimenopause, women will get workups for dementia. Okay. They will get workups for dementia. Then, if you have some sensory sensitivities, those suddenly can be unbearable. It can be light, it can be sound, right? Women will say, like, I cannot be in a lit room. And they'll say this like in my luteal or in perimenopause, right? Or like I can't stand that sound of chomping, right? And it's like the person's not really chomping that loud, or they were not chomping as loud, any different than they were last week. But our sensory right? Perception of that is. Multiple clinicians and researchers in the space, we're getting better, right? We're getting better. This is directly linked to estrogen's decline and how it works with dopamine. So, this isn't coming out of nowhere, right? But it removes that cushioning that let us compensate for these traits all along. So, in a way, estrogen was kind of our buffer, right? Like, even though we have an issue with dopamine, when we had our estrogen or when it was at a normal levels, it was kind of our buffer. It was helping us. Okay. So now we are in our 40s or 50s or 30s, and you feel like your brain suddenly is falling apart. You're not falling apart, right? But now we don't have that access to the dopamine that we used to. And I like to tell people this, you're not developing dementia, right? The majority of you are not developing dementia. But the way I like to explain a neurodivergent brain is this. Our brains are like Ferraris. We have Ferrari engines, okay? They're big, they're beautiful, they're expensive. I mean, come on, neurodivergent women, we're mostly amazing and high functioning, right? We got 8 kids and we're managing the households, we're CEOs, we entrepreneurs, we run businesses. We're amazing, right? Yes, we are. We are amazing. But guess what? We have Ferrari brains and we have the brakes of an old, rusty, dusty, musty Ford from the 1930s. Okay. Our inhibitory signals are not there. Okay. And this is what happens. Now we're losing the estrogen, right? And things start to really fall off the rails. Okay. Brain fog, right? Okay, so why do so many women not get diagnosed? We touched on this a little bit, not get diagnosed until late 40s, 50s, 60s, I'm even seeing. Okay, so let's talk about some things we already talked about. Number one, diagnostic criteria was built around boys. We know as girls and women, we present differently. Okay, so that gets missed. There wasn't a tool to adequately, accurately diagnose us. Number two, we talked about masking, right? Masking makes these traits even harder to see because we're amazing and we are so good at it. So from the outside, everything seems wonderful, right? Like, wow, she's amazing. Look at all the things she can handle. I'm sure every one of you in the room has been told one time, I don't know how you do what you do, right? Has anybody, I've been told that, I don't know how you do all the things you do. And what I say to myself is, yeah, I don't know either. And you don't see me crying in my closet for an hour or not getting out of my car for an hour because I can't down regulate, right? Then we talked about estrogen, right? During that reproductive years was quietly, supporting us. It was the cushion supporting that dopamine system and making masking even possible for us. Okay. Then maybe it's perimenopause that pulls all of that out from underneath us. So when we put these things together and we get very specific, it's a very common story. That one maybe you identify with. A girl whose traits were subtle or internalized gets missed in childhood. Okay. She then becomes a woman who is exceptionally good at masking. She's high achieving, she's organized looking, she's socially fluent on the surface. Her hormones for 2 or 3 decades give her just enough dopamine support to keep the whole system running, right? Then insert perimenopause. And that hormonal support goes bye bye. And for the first time in her life, in our life, those coping mechanisms that always worked, no matter how expensive they were to us, they don't work anymore. You cannot out willpower this. And by the way, willpower is run on dopamine. Most people don't know that, but willpower is actually run on dopamine. This is not something that you can willpower through. You literally cannot tolerate it anymore and can't cope. So look at these clinical samples that have looked specifically at age of ADHD diagnosis, have found women are on average diagnosed years later than men. Some clinical based studies put the average age of diagnosis for women in their late 30s compared to mid 20s for men. And that's really an underestimate, right? Of the true gap across that population, since the numbers come from people who actually have made it to the clinic. I don't know how many of you are out there that don't have a formal diagnosis, and it's not that you need a formal diagnosis, but this data is only coming from people that actually are diagnosed or are reporting these symptoms. There are so many of us that are not, and or that don't even know that, right? That we think this is what's happening, we identify it, but we don't have that actual diagnosis. So of course the literature is not where it needs to be. Okay. So when women finally get diagnosed, 41, 45, 52, like I told you, 70 in some circumstances, it's not that her brain just changed, although it feels like that, right? It's that the system was hiding her brain. The system that we had, the hormones that we had, is out of support. Okay. That diagnosis really isn't late. It's actually been missed, right? And that also brings a whole other level of issues with it, right? And how do we grieve after we've been diagnosed, and so many things that come with that. Okay. It's a lot. All right, let's take a peek at ADHD, autism, PMDD, PMOS, because that's the new verbiage for PCOS. And look here. So there's something I actually see consistently in my own practice, and I've treated thousands of neurodivergent women. They are my favorite because, of course, I am my favorite too, right? But a woman walks in with an ADHD diagnosis from one provider, a PMDD diagnosis from her gynecologist, a PMOS diagnosis from another visit years before. I think I have PMOS, and maybe a strong suspicion of autism. Nobody's ever formally evaluated. Four labels, okay? Four specialists, zero conversation between any of them on what it could actually be, okay? Connected or coincidental, right? So let's start with PMOS. Okay, it used to be called polycystic ovarian syndrome. We've taken out the ovary and made it metabolic because that's actually what it is. It is a metabolic syndrome, a hormonal condition that involves elevated androgens, irregular periods, and metabolic effects, insulin resistance, elevated cortisol. Okay, large studies, including well-cited UK study, followed closely to 17,000 women with PMOS, have found that women with PMOS carry a higher likelihood of, what can you think of? A co-occurring mental health diagnosis. And that children born to mothers with PMOS show an increased likelihood of being diagnosed with ADHD or autism. Okay? So again, is it that the PMS came first, or is it that the neurodivergence was there and we got diagnosed with anxiety or depression, right? And not ADHD or autism? Interesting thought. Okay. Then, as an integrative medicine doctor, I like to think about how the body is all created, because as a neurodivergent woman, we are very sensitive to changes in hormones, sensitive to medications, right? All of those things. We get this other label. A lot of, I think, PMS gets diagnoses get placed because nobody knows what else to say or call. And then what's happening there metabolically, if you're insulin resistant, your cortisol is going up, that's giving you that chronic fight or flight and sympathetic, which is not helping our dopamine. Okay, it's not helping our that norepinephrine surge is not helping the rest of those. Okay. The leading theory connecting this to ADHD and autism involves prenatal androgen exposure. The idea that elevated androgens during a window of brain development may influence how the brain wires both conditions. So whether that's there or not, right? But that's kind of what we kind of think without enough literature, right? So we need to take that for what it may. Now let's bring back PMDD again into the picture. And PMDD and ADHD share the same dopamine hormone sensitivity. PMDD, premenstrual dysphoric disorder, and autism research, well, again, inconsistent because we don't have enough of it, shows that the exact numbers find elevated rates compared to the general population. Okay, so PMDD, guess what? We have elevated, we already said this, 40% of that 4 to 6% are neurodivergent. Okay, so if you zoom out a minute, right, zoom out of this, hormone sensitive neurotransmitter systems, shared developmental and androgen pathways, and a menstrual cycle, right, that touches all of it. That's not four coincidental conditions. That's one interconnected biological picture being treated by four different people who never talk to each other. Hopefully, you have not experienced that in your course of finding out your neurodivergence and dealing with things. But it's so true every day, even today, earlier today, women sit in my chair and they say, nobody listens. I went to my gyno, they said this. I went to my primary, they said this. I went to my psychiatrist, they said this. But nobody's putting together that whole picture. And that's really where it needs to. These things are interrelated. I think this says it perfectly. It's one interconnected biological picture, but being treated separately. And it's not separate. Here we go. Four specialists, zero conversion. Okay. If you have one, two, or three of these, right? This isn't just like unlucky, right? We got to look at the pattern and the biology and what's actually happening. Okay. Okay. Let's do some reframes a little bit because we've been through a lot. Let's talk about what we've talked about. So, neurodivergence is a different operating system. Okay. You can pick what we want to be. Maybe, do you want to be the Windows or do you want to be the Mac? I think we're the Mac. Okay. It's not a malfunction, it's biology and it's just different. Okay. ADHD and autism, we know that look different in women and men and boys. The playbook is different. Masking has what? Right? We're so good at it, right? It actually sometimes can have delayed our diagnosis. Hormones matter, ladies. They matter if we're 15 and ADHD artistic, and they matter if we're 45 or 55 or even 65 if they're not present, right? Hormones matter, okay? And when those hormones start to decline in perimenopause, the whole house can come down. Okay. We talked about, excuse me, the major reason why so many of us are misdiagnosed is not because anything changed, but because the system failed us. Okay. And we're really, really amazing at masking. Okay. And that we looked at PMDD, PMOS, ADHD, and autism, and that they share hormonal biology. Okay. They're not unrelated. They're not unrelated. None of this is about anything being wrong with you, as I already said that earlier. It's about a body and a brain that have been running on biology that nobody had fully explained to us now. I see over and over again the struggle of neurodivergence, and I do think that we are collectively getting better at it, but guess why? It's because we're talking about it, not just the medical profession, because the medical profession still really isn't talking that much about it. It's every one of you out there, right? It's your friends. It's these groups. I see these groups on Facebook, late diagnosis, burnout, ADHD. I look at those. I see what you guys are struggling with. They're sitting in my chair, and my heart goes out because we have to look at you as a whole person, right? What are your nutrient levels, right? What is your B6? What is your magnesium? These are simple. Magnesium is responsible for 300 enzymatic reactions in the body. Guess what? Those are precursors to neurotransmitters, ladies. Okay. Um, we have to look at what our food intake, right? We're not getting into the nitty gritty of everything tonight. Obviously, this is just a master class, but it matters. It matters what our protein intake, it matters how much fiber we get. And guess what? When you add on neurodivergence, these wellness tips that everybody says we fail at a lot of time, right? And then again, one more thing we feel bad about. Why though? Like take meal prepping, for example. So a lot of people have sensory issues. A lot of us women have texture issues, and we only have 5 or 6 safe foods. So when this industry says, well, just meal prep, it's like, ew, meal prep? I'm not touching that, right? Or like meal prep, I can eat 5 things. Or when you say increase your protein because you need protein, which you do, but that's not easy, right? That's not always easy in the neurodivergent world. And we live in a world where information is at our fingertips, right? Take a cold plunge, intermittent fast, sauna. And the truth behind all of those things is you actually have to find what's right for you. We know basic fundamental principles. We know hormones matter. We know basic nutrients matter. We know we have to get down our insulin resistance and we have to decrease inflammation in our body. Those are foundations, okay? And those can be done pretty easily. But then it's like, what works for us? Well, it depends. And every one of us in this room, every one of us that's neurodivergent, guess what? That is different. So, and I say this to all women, right? When what works for your friend isn't going to work for you, and that is okay. But also, as neurodivergent women, we want so badly for things to work so that we can feel better, especially in perimenopause, that we're willing to try anything. And then when we try it and it doesn't work for us, because really it would never have worked for us because it doesn't work for our brain, then guess what we do? We blame ourselves again. And this is a mission and a path that I'm on, especially about hormonal therapy for women in midlife, neurodivergent women, because now we are finally getting a lot of people in the zeitgeist, a lot of famous doctors, hallelujah, to talk about hormones for women. But guess what? No one is talking about. They're not talking about how if you put a neurodivergent woman on a 0.25 estrogen patch, she may lose her mind. Okay. And that's okay because we're hormonally sensitive. I have women, I like to use the gel. We start sometimes, here's a drop. Okay, we're doing a drop for 5 days, then two more, right? Because what else happens is if we can't tolerate this, or and now again, same thing like the wellness trends, everybody says estrogen and progesterone change their life. And then we go try estrogen and progesterone, and it's terrible for us. We can't sleep, we're mad, our breasts are tender, all of these things. We think again we failed, but really we didn't. Okay. Really, we need to go start low and go slow. Maybe we need vaginal estrogen, right? Here's an interesting phenomenon that happens in neurodivergence, and this happens a lot of my PMDD girls. What does progesterone do? So progesterone gets broken down to L-pregnenolone, which then affects GABA of our brain. GABA is our what? Rest and digest, right? Our Netflix and chill. But guess what happens? Sometimes when those receptors are partially taken, so we give 100 milligrams of progesterone, that feels really terrible to neurodivergent women. But guess what? If we saturate all those receptors and take you to 400, you feel great. Why? Because now we're stable. And it isn't the number, ladies, that we have an issue with. It isn't the number in PMDD, right? It's not what the number of your estrogen is. It's the change. It's the fluctuation. We call that the delta. Our brains don't like that. And so sometimes the answer is not doing progesterone or guess progesterone doesn't work for you. Sorry, no. Sometimes it's, well, we're going to give you 400 milligrams of progesterone. And trust me, every patient in my office says, what? I just told you that like this made me have the worst night of my life. And now you want me to take 3 times the amount? And I'm like, just trust me. And once we saturate those receptors, that feels stable to our brains. Okay. So there's a lot of nuances, right, that go into this. And that's why it's important that you get a community, right? That's why I love these Facebook groups and these community groups because we're all out there, we're talking about it. We're saying, hey, I have these symptoms. Has anybody tried this or does anybody try this in a community of women that are just like us? Right? We're not asking these women over here, which we love, neurotypical women, but we're not saying, oh, hey, does intermittent fasting work for you? Right? We're asking our group. And there's still variations within that, right? Intermittent fasting may work for someone. It doesn't typically usually work for neurodivergence or really midlife women because it can increase cortisol. But everything needs to be so personalized. Okay. And we have to, giving us the understanding of what's happening to our brain is really, 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 important. Okay. I do want to put you on to something that I have. If 45 minutes wasn't enough, I actually did create a course it's actually 6 weeks. I did it every week on my Substack for 6 weeks. You don't need to take 6 weeks. You can actually do it in 3 hours. But it maps out this whole territory. And it is called, just like this, the biology of the neurodivergent brain. But I actually take you through every single one of the phases. So we start with your period, right? What's actually happening? We get really in depth about estrogen, progesterone, testosterone, what's actually happening. We look at graphs, we talk about this stuff. Then we look at the follicular lift, then we look at ovulation, and we do see some variations in ovulation. A lot of neurodivergent women will get diagnosed with POTS, right? So I see a lot of women You're supposed to feel really good in ovulation, right? A lot of neurotypical women say that's their best time of the month. A lot of neurodivergent women do not. Okay. I have a lot of neurodivergent women who are passing out right after ovulation. I have them that feel terrible after ovulation. And this is a hormonal sensitivity problem, right? So for a lot of those women, I will double their dose of progesterone. If they're passing out day 16, 17, I will double or triple their dose of progesterone on day 14 to day 20, right? To support that system. All right. There's a lot of nuances. And in this course, we also talk about what do we do, right? How do we get next level? What do we do about this? Okay, it's great that this is happening. I have to live in this body and in this life. And how do I do that? Right. And we talk about that. We build, there's lots of PDFs and things you get to do. And there's even a GPT that I built for tracking purposes for you. What did I eat? What did I do? What is my patterns? Right? Just talk into it. It's very interesting. But then a pathway of like, okay, how do I take the next step? I'm a busy, CEO, or I'm a busy mom. Like, how do I get through luteal? Like, can I support my body? Can I do hormones? What is it that I need potentially? And then also, what do I say? How do I ask? I can't be everyone's doctor. I wish I could. I wish I could be every single neurodivergent woman's doctor because I understand the physiology, right? And I know how sensitive we are, or this might not work, or that, but I can't. So the best thing we can do is I can arm you with the information, right? I can develop these things where you can bring the script to your doctor that came off the GPT and says, blah, 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 this is what's been happening to me, blah, 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 I need this workup, right? Have you had your thyroid checked? These are just some questions for you. Have you had your thyroid checked? And I mean a complete thyroid, TSH, T3, T4, reverse T3, TPO antibodies. Okay. And is your TSH less than 1.5? Okay. I see so many women subclinical hypothyroidism. They do better when they're not. Do you know what your fasting insulin is? Okay. Do you know what your vitamin D is? By the way, it should be 70. So go look if you had labs. If it's not 70, it needs to be up. We need vitamin D for our brain and our blood vessels. Okay. It's essential. Do you know what your ferritin is? That's your iron stores. We see so much, many, many, many women with low ferritin. Is your gut an issue? Right? If your gut's an issue, we're never going to heal. Do you know where in your body you make the most serotonin, the most of your serotonin? Yeah, in the gut. Okay, in your gut. I have had women come in and say, Dr. Sarah, I was completely fine like 6 months ago, and now I'm not. I'm so depressed. I'm this, I'm that. When I dig in, guess what I found out? That person was getting multiple antibiotics for teeth infections and teeth extractions, and they completely messed up her gut. When I got her gut testing back, almost zilch amount of serotonin was being made in the gut. Now, it's processed in your brain, right? But she wasn't depressed, right? Her gut was dysfunctional. She had dysbiosis. She had, leaky gut, right? Or gut intestinal permeability. We got to look for these things so we can optimize it. That doesn't mean that takes away your neurodivergence. No, but guess what? It gives you that cellular capacity, right, to be able to do through your day to day and to thrive. Because this isn't about just existing. That's not how we should live. Okay, we should be able to thrive with the different operating system that we have. And that's what it's about. The first step of it, I would say, is figuring it out, right? Is understanding those changes and what's happening to us and putting a name and asking the right questions and knowing what to ask for. And then having a little bit of muscle backup. So when your doctor was like, oh, a ferritin of 20 is normal, you're like, no, it's not. Dr. Sarah said it isn't. It's optimally supposed to be 80 because guess what? In the conversion to serotonin and dopamine, guess what's one of the cofactors? Iron. Okay, B6 too, right? That's what we talked about earlier about B6 deficiency. So it all starts with our education, and you're all very educated, I know. So I appreciate you. I thank you. I thank you for spending this evening with me. And I hope that this gives a little bit more clarity. Obviously, we can't go into depths of everything, but I really hope that this gives a little bit more clarity to what's going on. Maybe now you can dig a little deeper into questions that you're asking yourself or some of your symptomatology. What I didn't put on here, and I wish I did, I'm sorry about that, is you can find my Substack. So on Substack, I only write for neurodivergent women. It is pretty amazing. We talk about a lot of things. It's free, just be a free subscriber. But we're building a tribe, right? That's it. We're trying to build a tribe of women who we can learn from each other and we can help each other. So you can just look me up on Substack, Dr. Sarah, C. Jones on Substack, and come on and join us over there because we'd be excited to have you. Make sure that you also are checking your emails after this because you will get the replay. Just make sure it didn't go to spam. If you got the alerts coming up, okay, good. But if you didn't see any alert emails, make sure that we didn't go to spam and that highlight us so you can get the emails. I will also be sending out some of our clips on YouTube. You can go check out the YouTube too. Lots of stuff on ADHD, burnout, perimenopause, and some of those stuff gets a little bit more focused than we were able to do tonight. So check out that and check out the replay. And again, I really, really, really thank you for being here. I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and I'm going to check. Let me check and just read some of this stuff. Um, Let me see. Sorry, I can't see with my glasses. We're going to go. Yep. So found out, Michelle, when you found out at 55. Absolutely. B6, omega 3s, and protein. Yeah. So omega 3s are actually really powerful. And you can actually combine your omega 3 with CoQ10. So I'm going to nerd out a second here just because we're answering questions, but this is the mitochondria. This is the electron transport chain. One thing you see here as a cofactor, CoQ10. Okay. So just actually by taking CoQ10 alone, you're going to increase your energy production, right? Again, there's not one thing in life or medicine, ladies, that is like, oh, and influencers and people will have us thinking this, but like, oh, do this and the whole world changes for us. No, it's really all of those little levers that we're pulling, right? Okay, do you have adequate amount of, precursors, vitamin D, magnesium? Do you have enough glutathione, right? Glutathione is the body's biggest antioxidant, and it actually helps phase 1 and phase 2 detox of the liver, right? So sometimes as we're processing things, if our detox is not, on point, guess what? Toxic metabolites go back into our system. We give glutathione back, boom, 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 that system is working better. We're decreasing inflammation. It's all about the little things. Someone mentioned vaginal estrogen. Yes, I love this. Vaginal estrogen, first off, I'll say this because we don't talk about sex enough, and I know this is not about sex, but again, it's one of those things as women we should be screaming from all of the rooftops. But vaginal estrogen is like female Viagra, okay? We get something called genitourinary syndrome of menopause, and it's actually very frightening because think about what you think when you think of 70, 80-year-old ladies, right? You see urinary tract infections, right? Confusion, those types of things. Vaginal estrogen decreases urinary tract infections by 68%. That's incredible, right? And we call it the female Viagra because our vaginal tissue needs hormones. And as we lose those, right, then that tissue atrophies. That's actually what puts us at risk for UTIs and other types of infections. So if you have painful sex, or even if orgasms are changing, right, it's like, oh my gosh, it's taking 30 minutes or it's not happening at all, right? Vaginal estrogen can be really helpful. I also saw that someone said maybe they didn't know if it was working. That can be too. 2 times a week is a good start, but sometimes actually we have to add testosterone in with it. And we have medications like Interosa that also can be compounded because guess what? The vaginal tissue also has testosterone receptors, right? And so sometimes the estrogen isn't quite enough. We add in that little piece of testosterone, and then there we go. Women will feel much better. I just want to see if there's anything else. Yeah, assessment. I know it is hard to get assessed. I agree with you. And it depends also on where you live in the country. right? Where you are, what are those resources? What I would say, and diagnosis is important because that kind of is able to start our journey, but I would say get involved in communities, right? Come on over, join the Substack, join those Facebook groups. And if you're identifying with these things while you're working the logistics of trying to be diagnosed, start doing some of the stuff that people are talking about that work, right? Make sure your basic nutrients are okay. Make sure you're taking your magnesium at night. And majority of people don't have a contraindication to that, right? I don't want you trying methylene blue and all these other things, which are powerful, without talking to a provider. But the basic nutrient levels, you can do that, right? Try to optimize those things. And as you're waiting to get this diagnosis and seeing if we can help ourselves, because the diagnosis is the beginning, but even the diagnosis isn't going to fix it, right? We still have got to work the body together and the system together. Okay, so thank you. Check your emails. You always, you have an email there. You can message me anytime if you have any questions. I appreciate you all for being here tonight and have a lovely night.